welcome to Varn Blog, and I'm here with
Sh-
returning guest and old friend of the show, Joseph Sciortino, and we are talking the left. I would say probably socialism in quotation marks more than the left, because the left is actually a really big concept right now, and anti-politics and the trends that show up. I mean, I think people are going to recognize a lot of what you call anti-politics is what a lot of other people call populism, but I think anti-politics is actually a better way to frame it, because most of the projects don't really have a positive politics in any mass sense. They deal in channeling dissatisfaction, so you have political entrepreneurs who can take advantage of that. But as far as positive programs, the moment you try to build positive political programs out of a lot of this stuff, you start seeing some real problems. So I was going to ask you, you and I have known each other and been observers of the socialist left in America for a decade at least, maybe longer. I've known you for longer than that. And we saw the DSA go gangbusters, mainly in response to Trump 1, also in response to the seeming anti-political message of Bernie. We saw the Bernie Sanders movement not be able to pick up the same anti-political steam in 2020. And definitely post 2020, Bernie is almost a Democratic establishment figure, even if he's not formally a Democrat. And, you know, yes, the moderates suppress him, etc. But I mean, the guy was given key committee assignments. So it's hard to say that he didn't have any establishment power in the Democratic Party. So I wanted to ask you, though, we talked about this in terms of Mamdani, so we'll start there. There's already beginning to be fragments in the honeymoon of the DSA unity around Mamdani. It's happened very quickly. He is making backroom deals that go against the DSA's endorsement process, often to help other progressive Democrats. If you've heard about the Avelis versus Broadlander and Avelis stepping out of the campaign and what seems to be a brokered deal by Mamdani.
Yeah, there was also what was it? Chiase, is that his name? He was running against House Minority Leader Jeffries, and I think Mamdani stepped in to stop that. I do think it does speak to a lot of the limitations of this, actually, because the problem for Mamdani, of course, is that he's running as a political disruptor, but not really from a very strong standpoint.
Right.
Because again, he actually does depend on making some of these backdoor deals just to be able to govern at all, or to deliver on any of the promises that he made. He actually has managed to get some. I guess Hochul has been sending out peace feelers to him and like is willing to work with him right now. So maybe he can get some things done in that sense. But yeah, as far as this fragmentation that we were talking about too, though, it's interesting. I feel like the more that, or if he's able to retain his popularity within New York, I think the left will go with it.
Mm-hmm.
The less he is, I think the more that they're going to kind of shuffle him off and like ignore him really, or pretend he doesn't exist. I feel like we saw this with de Blasio, and I feel like even with AOC, you've kind of seen some of this to an extent, really. It's really more about, I think, the left is like this sort of political faction that wants power, right? And if they see Mamdani as a vehicle for that, they'll keep on board. If not, they'll jump off, or they'll fragment.
Right. Well, I mean, it's definitely clear that it's fragmented. We also saw this attempt with the left populists around the DSA, with Graham Plantner, who is not endorsed by the DSA, has no relationship to the DSA whatsoever. But you saw the kind of professional DSA face around Jacobin magazine move in that direction. I mean, one of the things about the fragmentation though is like, I can tell you I'm now in the DSA, and the DSA has moved significantly left of where it was in 2017, 2018, 2019 in rhetoric and in internal politicking. But Mamdani actually shows that it hasn't moved significantly less than what it actually does. But the buyers are more for certain factions seems to be immediate. And I wonder what you make of that. Like, how do you deal with that? Like,
right. I mean, I think most will go along with it, even if they don't want, even if there's grumbling. That's kind of the sense I get. If Mamdani actually does manage to be a successful mayor, but ironically, a lot of his success will come out of actually being fairly distant from them.
Right. I mean, there's a couple of things I think we should. I've talked about this weirdly on a podcast I did about Marxist writings in Ireland, but we were talking about, well, who's the actual constituency? We refer to DSA electeds, but if you think about even someone like Mamdani, who is a cadre candidate, meaning he comes out of the DSA. If you think about the DSA electeds in a certain way, though, who are are they even the DSA's elected? Because what the DSA asks of them and what the DSA can give them are disproportionate. So the DSA asks them to hold some kind of line, but Mamdani's a Democrat and he answers to a constituency of New York City, right? Of which the DSA is probably at the very high end 10,000 of a city of what? Like, what is how many people?
8 to 9 million, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's just it just doesn't really stand to reason that a city that's larger than many countries is beholden to a group that is not a formal party. It's actually technically a political nonprofit. It's not separate from the Democrats. I mean, the DSA was founded to be a caucus organization within the Democratic Party when Peter Cornejo's New America movement joined with one of the many Harrington groupings in the Democratic Party. And we saw a cycle that had a similar issue with the Rainbow Coalition and the election of David Dinkins. And you and I talked about that. And you hear, rumblings about like, the Republican Socialist LaGuardia and stuff like that. Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, the thing about LaGuardia too is that ultimately he's the last successful reformist mayor of New York. When you think about it, and the reason why is because he was a client of the most powerful president in American history.
Right. He was a client of our Bonaparte. And for those of you who don't know, that is Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So, when the New Deal dried up during the war effort, what happened to LaGuardia?
Yeah, his authority vitiated. So there you go.
I mean, you and I have talked about the bond markets, the city council. And these are all things Mamdani is going to have to deal with. The police department, and we know that the police, the relationship with the police is part of what strained David Dinkins. It was a strain on De Blasio as well. While I support getting rid of Tisch, I think Tisch's politics are terrible. But the thing is, like, will the mayor be able to withstand open warfare with the police? Although, I guess the other thing you can say is, like, are they going to stop just because he's nice to Tisch? Like historically, they don't. They don't like the concessions De Blasio made to the NYPD did not win him any support or favors. So it's hard to say. But I bring all this up because I do think Mamdani. The interesting about Mamdani to me is one part of it is tied into international and national politics about Israel, which the mayor of New York City can do jack and shit. And two,
I did want to adjust something actually, if you don't mind, because I saw a comment actually on the old. Actually, I don't even know like what the live comments are on this right now. I don't have a link to that, but I wanted to comment because there was a commenter on the old on our previous discussion on Mamdani, and I didn't notice this, but it was actually a very insightful thing. It noted that like something that Mamdani did do was sort of he did not take the typical New York City politician line on Israel. I do think that actually helped him because he managed to step away from the sort of obligatory virtue signaling of the typical New York City politician. Like at the debate, this was talked about too. Like every other New York City mayoral candidate was saying, "I'll go to Israel." Mamdani said, "No, I'm going to govern here."
Right.
And he managed to balance it out with. He was able to come across as pro-Palestinian without seeming insensitive to Jews, and I think that is something that left-wing politicians have struggled with. But I do think he managed to actually toe that line pretty well. And it also made him look different from other politicians, including other left-wing politicians.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, even compared to Bladlander, for example, who has, liberal Zionist inclinations. And he also, not to remind people, he also doesn't have the problems of Jesse Jackson. Who couldn't thread that needle so cleanly in the 1980s.
For many reasons.
Yeah.
I mean, that might be a problem for him later on, though, if you have like advisors or, people or underlings that, say inflammatory stuff. But if he steals with it quickly, he could probably stir by.
Well, I mean, I think it's clear to me Mamdani is a gifted politician. I don't know if that's what the left, the socialist left in America actually wants.
I don't think they know what they want. I think they want power, but they don't know how to get there.
They want power, but do they even know what power is? Right.
I was thinking too, actually, today, because I've been thinking about this a lot, actually, and it comes out of the Piping Shrike, who, he's one of those Australian writers that I've delved into quite a bit in the last decade. I think there's kind of this inversion too of. I actually think, although there is a lot of role play that they're trying to, I think, on the socialist left to, as far as. I think they want to repeat the past in terms of like building mass party, but I think they approach democracy in a very inverted way compared to the old social democratic parties, for instance.
Go ahead.
We don't. Well, I mean, like it's really we have passed from a period of representative democracy to a period of political democracy. Political democracy defines the current period. Representative democracy defined mass politics from maybe the late 19th century, more or less, up to most of the 20th century.
I would like up to maybe to me the end of mass politics is the 1950s, but
it's hard to I mean you can have
you have like mass political movements, but you don't have like mass the fragmentation of for the United States, for me, for example, the fact that all the civil rights stuff eventually started having to come through the courts was an indication that mass politics as something that can be manifested in Congress was over. But maybe you disagree with me.
No, I actually do think there's been I do think there was an attenuation because once civil rights and voting rights were won, but then I think the movement wound up kind of at a point of now because again, like social conditions were still rough. You won formal political emancipation, but but social conditions are still rough, and you're this rather isolated group within American society. And I don't think the movement really figured out how to like break out of that really. Maybe it probably couldn't actually. And I think what happened is that, well, I guess we saw that process happen throughout the 60s and 70s. There was a move towards pressuring the courts, which that didn't go well eventually. Eventually, the courts wound up putting barriers, especially on busing, for instance. But yeah, no, I agree with you on that. Actually, like I think the movement starts to really attenuate from like 1965 onwards. And I think that's even like why there is definitely like a degree of despair that comes with that as well. Actually, which I think even gets at like why actually the social movement aspect moves from the organized civil rights movement into like say the urban riots. It's sort of it is kind of an expression of frustration that there wasn't really any way. There wasn't like a clear. There wasn't a clear break, really. I think.
But to me, that leaves us in kind of lurch. I mean, like I told you my theory that I've taken from Michael Sandel, that you have like basically 5 American republics. You have the early kind of elitist yeoman settler one. You have the post the local representative republicanism of 1820s to 1860. You have the national representative that was still pretty local from 1860 to World War I. And then you have the beginning of an administrative republic that still got mass politics all over it. I mean, I would agree with you on that. From World War I until the end of what we might call the post-war consensus. And then you had the political democracy administrative state of 1965 forward. And then you've had crisis since the late 80s. So you have crisis justifications.
I think there's something to that. Yeah. When I work off of Mirror, it's mostly about the European political parties, but I do think there's sort of a rough, you could see, the elite cadre parties. That's of the pre-mass political period. Then there was the rise of the mass party. That's the social democratic parties and the labor parties of the late 19th to the early 20th century are really the prototypes of that. But also even like confessional parties. Confessional parties are another example of that. So the mass political party, that lasts really up until about World War II. And eventually I think there's a process that happens afterwards where the parties become catch-all parties. They start moving away from like their traditional bases towards like trying to catch like other broad sections of society in the rest of the electorate. Here's the thing, though. I think the left tends to think that what happens is that parties fatally declined in the 70s and 80s due to neoliberalism. That actually isn't even what Mirror argues. And they tend to read that into Mirror. Mirror says that the decline really starts after World War II.
Right.
And it does. Because you already see the parties moving away from explicit socialism or trying to on the center left trying to catch middle class voters, because that sharp social antagonism, that class war aspect that's already starting to decline.
No, it declines like immediately after World War II, and
it does. So the parties have to adapt to that, and then eventually the parties gradually cartelize, and after the 1980s, you have a cartel. You have like a cartel party system where the parties they're pretty hollowed out. They're pretty ideologically identical. They're all chasing the general public, and of course, I think we're actually moving into a post-cartel period now, because again, populists have wiped out the old post-war political establishment to a large degree. But
do you think that's true for the Democrats and Labor? I'm not sure.
It's a very different beast, I think. I mean, the thing about I think the thing about the U.S. parties is that they were always kind of catch-all.
Yeah, they seem to have always been catch-all parties.
Yeah,
with a brief period of mass political ideology.
Well, they had ties to society,
right,
for sure. But it is a different system. It's weird compared to Europe. But I do think that broadly, though. I mean, they are kind of cartels, though. I'd have to, I want to formulate more of my thinking on this, and that's still a bit of a work in progress. But Yeah, I think the thing is too is that also these populist political entrepreneurs, they can take over the parties theoretically. Obviously, Trump already did that.
Right.
You know, and it's a different Republican Party than it was 10 years ago, completely.
Absolutely.
You know,
Like you think about the rise and fall of Paul Ryan, like
yeah,
a guy who seems to be consolidating the kind of Bush fusionist libertarian wing, and as soon as he comes to power, that's already over.
yeah.
Like,
And Marco Rubio has basically been body snatched by Trump,
right.
or at least
Yeah.
Trumpism. I don't know what's going to happen with Venezuela, but that's another thing though. Trumpism. Well, I could get that at some other point, but I think
I'd like to talk to you about Trumpism because you seem to think that his anti-political impetus is almost gone, but
it's heavily eroded, I think. But yeah, I do think we have a. What was the point that we were getting at actually with this?
we were talking about the kind of strange way the left relates to politics and anti-politics. Like,
yeah. Well, I think the thing is too is that what was representative democracy? It was this idea that these social groups would enter the political arena with political parties that were supposed to represent, that were supposed to fight for them. Basically, they were supposed to sort of force their interests on parliament or the legislature, et cetera, et cetera. They were less concerned about governing. It's not that they were against governing necessarily, but they were mostly about representing, making noise, and what's happened, of course, ever since then, because that's a product of the mass political era, really, is that the parties become entirely about governing. They become the parties become very much about the state. They rely on the state more. The parties are more centralized around political offices rather than grassroots activists or the mass social ties that they once had, especially.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what's happened with I think what we see with these entrepreneurial moves by the populist left is, I think they think that you can build a movement out of office. That is not what that's not how people thought, or that's not how socialists approached this in the past. I don't think. I think it's sort of an inversion. I think the thing is that the movement had already existed, and office was more of a. They treated office as a way to sort of make noise or discipline or discipline the rest of the political system around it. More or less.
Right? Yeah. I mean, they were particularly the social democratic parties. In theory, anyway. Now, in practice, this is not so much true, but in theory, anyway, they were interested in more opposing what other forces could do. They were oppositionists and even abstentionists and negationists at times.
Yeah,
and
it sounds anti-political, doesn't it?
Right. And like you try to get socialists to do that today, and like, oh, we need Medicare for all, and I'm like,
yeah,
what
actually need a conversation if they about stopping that? I think that's one of the. I think the populist left the struggle. I think the problem is they actually are believers in government, and that's a very hard thing to sell working class voters on, actually, because they're actually quite skeptical of government. They're not. That doesn't mean that they're Reaganite, but they're not. I think that they think that there's limits on what politics can actually deliver for them.
I feel like they know that. I mean,
yeah, they do.
I mean, this is one of the things that I keep on pointing out when you have someone like Chomsky. This Chomsky's a little bit controversial to mention today, but Mr. Manufacturing Consent hanging out with Steve Bannon and being all up in the Epstein files. Not up in the Epstein styles in anything untoward, but in a way you would not have expected, even knowing that he had relations to Epstein, which I have known since 2020. But anyway, back to someone like Chomsky, who always, seems anti-political, anti-establishment, goes through all the problems of the American empire, et cetera, but then can never, because he's so invested in one end of the political spectrum, can never say, like, we should truly be abstentionist or we should truly not engage in policies because you don't control the policies once they're implemented. You can't make sure they're done with fidelity. I mean, just look at what happened to both the Great Society and the New Deal. You don't actually, that's not actually political power just to elect someone, have them implement a policy, and then let the administrative state, often under other parties who are ideologically opposed to you, administer that policy later on. And yet there are a lot of people in the center left of American politics and in the left of American politics, maybe not socialist, who are fundamentally against like abolishing anything or changing anything. You have people like Matthew Iglesias and other people being like, oh, we can't even abolish ICE. And by abolish ICE, they don't mean get rid of border control. They actually just mean move it back to the alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. And maybe like putting Department of Homeland Security back in general policing terms. That's all they mean. But, they're like, oh, it sounds too much like abolish the police. And to be fair to politicians, I think the general public is also kind of incoherent on this stuff. I don't think it's just left-wingers who are incoherent on this stuff. I mean, like, if you ask people how they feel about police, most people don't like them. But if you ask, you say, we're going to get rid of all policing in your neighborhood, I think your responses are going to be pretty damn varied.
Right. I mean, there is ambivalence. I think that the key is that people want policing. They don't want unaccountable policing.
Right.
The thing is, too, I mean, I don't know. Doesn't Marx talk in the Paris Commune about the police like having their political attributes removed and becoming instantly recallable? Yeah, I don't see the left ever talk about that actually. Like that actually would make more sense as a reform to push. Like recallable policing, it makes sense.
Recallable policing and also universal service and militias, which would there would be a militia like police force. That's another thing that comes up. Actually, classical anarchists believed in that too. They weren't going to like have all the police be social workers. They were going to have everybody basically be the police. So,
right. Of course, that can go in other directions too. But
absolutely. I mean, there's an ambivalence here. Like, for example, historically speaking, the left also supports universal conscription. And not just the socialist left. And the reason why they do that is it supposedly makes wars less likely. And there's some evidence for it. There's also some evidence against it.
Didn't stop World War I, did it? Or
no, it did not.
Yeah.
And if you go back to historical left liberal and even, early Lenin's position, Mao opposed it, but Lenin actually says it in State and Revolution. There should not be a standing army in a socialist state. And for those of you who don't mean, that doesn't mean that there aren't people who can fight and get military training. What that means is there's no army that's professional and separate from society. This is dropped with Mao, but
right.
That was also, by the way, argued by liberals in the 17th century that there should not be a standing army. It wasn't
the
even
anti-federalists had some interesting ideas, didn't they?
Mm-hmm.
They had some interesting critiques.
Yeah, they did.
Well, there was something I was going to say on this. Yeah, I guess the thing is that it's almost a non-starter, isn't it? Really? Or maybe yeah. I think too. Like it even like I think it gets that exchanged relationship. It gets at the exchanged relationship of society to the state anyway. Really, in a way that I think might be irrevocable, or very hard to revoke anyway. Like how easy is it going to be to? How can you get this public invested into conscription right now? I guess they're trying to do it in Europe. But it's not gonna help people feel more invested in the state over there. Quite the opposite, I think.
Well, this is one of the things I think where Americans tend to be American centric, and they don't realize that a lot of the problems we have actually exist in Europe, and in some cases have existed in Europe for longer. Um,
Oh yeah.
and right wing populism, and as a response to left populism. I mean, my argument against a lot of people is like, oh, we just keep trying the left populist game, but I'm like, I can't find a place on earth where it's actually worked. And I don't mean that like no, they never win. No, they win all the time, and then they immediately get voted out because they cannot do you cannot maintain both an anti and pro state position in power. Like you can't do it.
I think the only person who recently has or the only outfit that has is Morena in Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
But I think a lot of that is because they actually do things that would be poison to leftists in the United States. Nobody likes to talk about that, but it is true. I mean, I think, well, you know about it. I mean, you can elaborate on that.
Well, I mean, they'll make coalitions with like the PAN, which is the party theoretically to the right of the PRI, and they do things in civil society while also building up state capacity. But they are able to say, hey, we're not the party of the Revolution Institutionale, which, by the way, used to be a member of the Socialist International and used to be considered a left-wing party. It's been neoliberal for since the 70s, but like nonetheless, they also have to do things like manage the cartel system. They don't there's no, including the PRI, there's no party that either lets the cartels really rule, because that would be a disaster for them. But they are there is some truth to the idea that they're almost para-state actors in some ways, that they do have a relation to the state, and even functions in Mexican governance that I think Americans just can't wrap their minds around. and Morena actually opposes that to some degree, although can't do it completely because it would well, I mean, it would be really nasty if she did.
Right. Also, like, I think that they helped cut the bureaucracy and defunded NGOs. Actually, a lot of the activists left in Mexico hates Morena to some extent, right?
Right. I mean, the people who oppose her are like right-wing boomers and like a lot of the NGOs and stuff because and I think rightfully so. NGOs are weird public-private entities that like there's very little control of and are dominated by financial interest, which is true. Like structurally, it's true. Like, an American activist will talk about the NGO industrial complex, but then like the TSA is technically an NGO.
Right. I mean, how many work in other NGOs too? You have to wonder. It is New York.
Right.
I mean,
oh man, yeah.
Honestly, that's actually the secret reason, like, why DSA has so much pull in New York in a lot of ways, because it is kind of a political class citadel in a lot of ways. Because you have the financial industry, you have media, you have publishing, you have nonprofits. Those are big in New York as well. And of course, you have like government and international institutions in New York City as well, and a pretty powerful public sector union. Or public sector, you
have public sector unions still at the table in government, effectively, as opposed to in other places where they actually have a hostile position towards government.
Right, but I guess the thing is, though, is that like that is sort of like the contradiction, though. Like, you want socialism, but you're also this sort of it's also like how do I put it? Actually, there is a contradiction in wanting socialism, but also being I guess all of your class interests being tied up in the political state.
Right. I mean, it's one thing that the PMC debates tried to get to, but I don't think they could because their notion of what professional managerial was too vague.
No, I think
it basically was anyone with a college degree. But
right. I mean, I think the problem is that like a lack of critique of politics to get closer to that, really. And I think the kernel of truth to it is that if you're highly educated, you're more likely to view the world, and your profession is more likely to sort of guide you into viewing the world ideologically, or you have to treat the world ideologically.
mm-hmm.
If you're a lawyer, that's a good example.
Yeah. And I also think that's true on the right for the petite bourgeois because taxes and state policy disproportionately hit them. Whereas the working class, I mean, for example, a lot of people in the working class would do the following. They're going to vote whoever they think is disruptive because they don't think their life is going to fundamentally change. If you ask them, like the way I brought up Chomsky, and I dropped it, but I'll bring it back to it. If you ask them what policies they prefer, they will give you what would be considered relatively progressive answers, even on things people like, oh yeah, but only on like economic policy. No, even on social policy a lot of the time. But they don't believe anyone's going to actually do that. And frankly, as I've said many times, they're not wrong. There isn't a track record of that stuff being delivered. Like, even when politicians sincerely tried to do it, like back in the 60s, it wasn't delivered. And they haven't, you're almost at a living memory for when people were actually trying to do these things at anything above a municipal level. I guess you have some of this weirdly in California, although you do have this weird phenomenon where like the DSA, even though it's really big in LA, is really underrepresented in the Bay Area and isn't really that strong in California. For all of like California's lefty credentials, political podcasts don't do as well there, but left-wing political podcasts don't do as well there. That hub is definitely New York and then maybe Chicago. I can just tell you from my own numbers. In so much that there is a strong DSA, it tends to be people downstream of the entertainment industry, not the tech industry. It's very, very interesting. And when a lot of these people from California talk about politics, you know what they're talking about? New York. And it does reflect that whole culture mover post 60s thing. That like, everybody's battling between New York and California as who's the cultural dominant. And yet, it leads to these weird paradoxes. Like, a lot of progressives in another place, barring Bladlander's relationship to liberal Zionism, would be totally happy with a Bradlander. But because of the dominance of the DSA, and the DSA want to assert itself as its own political force and cadre system, it comes direct smack in conflict with them because that's also where they're at. They're in the same places as standard progressives and moderate Democrats who had, their constituencies vote for them for long periods of time. And I find it very interesting. I mean, it's one of the paradoxes of American anti-political thought is like, we're anti-political except for our local government, which sort of makes sense because that's the government where you are most likely to have actual knowledge and ties and actual effects. But even that's wearing down.
Like, the thing is too, like, how much there isn't a whole lot of participation in local governance either, really. I mean,
no, none.
Right. I think that even gets to a sense of that gets to actually like how weak the parties are too, even because I mean, it wasn't always quite that attenuated. But like with New York City, though, I mean, New York City historically has very low turnout in its elections. I mean, I'm not even sure what was the turnout for this one. Did it actually hit 50%? Because that would actually be unprecedented. No, it hit 40. Oh, the turnout was 43%.
Yeah, 43%.
That is,
which is big for that. It's way bigger than the last three.
Yeah, right. No, and it's big for New York City, but yeah, I mean,
and 29% voted in the primaries. That was it.
Yeah, I mean,
So
and it's big, but like for now, but compared to 75 years ago, not really.
no, I mean, can you like one? I think there's been a lot of presumptions that high turnouts favor the Democrats. I think that used to be true, but probably isn't as true as it
No,
used to be.
no, I think
But
there's been enough class depolarization that isn't true anymore.
right, I
And you
mean,
see that in Europe as well, of course.
oh yeah, I mean, I talk about. I mean, whether or not we consider uh the UK Europe, but I mean like Corbyn was the first election that you saw American style voting demographic patterns. So you saw poor people from richer cities vote for Corbyn, but working class people in poorer areas voted for Tories. And that started with Corbyn. It has not really changed. Um, there's a bunch of
Yeah,
reasons for it. Um,
it was, yeah, and there was a trend that way for decades. Brexit really was a big accelerant of it.
mm-hmm.
And actually, like the Red Wall fall, what was called like the Red Wall in Britain. That like it's old like mining and industrial constituencies that voted Labour since time immemorial. That completely collapses with Brexit.
Yeah.
And Corbyn never really he never angled Brexit. And I don't know if he ever could have really. I do think it was that was a hell of a difficult thing for him, actually, because if he embraced Brexit, it would have killed him on the left, probably.
Right.
But to embrace remainderism, which is what he basically had to by 2018, 2019, he had to cut off Labour's old base, which presumably you would think, a sort of left populist revival project would have problems with. But at the same time, like how populist was Corbynism really? Was it really I don't know. Like I guess the thing is, yeah. Sorry, go on.
Well, I mean, Corbynism's hard for me. We're gonna say this as people who are not in the UK, but and Corbynism is, I've always heard that we underestimated it. Like you and I even talked about this, and during I think the 2019 loss that Corbyn had. But I have pointed out to people that Corbyn on his own in this our party scenario has not proven to be particularly effective, particularly populist, or particularly coherent, or particularly popular. Despite the fact that you're seeing the Labor Party run itself into the ground like faster than predicted. I mean, it actually makes Biden's handling of 2020 to 2024 look kind of competent. Starmer's Labor Party has been often pulling to the right of the Tories and also doing stuff that's deliberately unpopular, I guess, to try to secure some kind of I don't really know what they're thinking, honestly.
I don't think they know what they're thinking either, honestly.
I mean, they're getting rid of things like jury trials, so I just don't understand what's going on over there.
Yeah, there's a. I wondered about that actually. Like, it's something I want to unpack more, or like think about more. But I do wonder, like, if you're seeing the political class tending to try to insulate itself more, or the state trying to insulate itself more from public accountability. I mean, that's always been a trend, but I do think we might be seeing an acceleration of that a little bit now.
Right, the anti-democratic democracy proponents, these are also people who talk about democracy all the time.
And the thing is, I do think actually populists getting into power have had some role in that as well.
I mean, that's one thing we can say is that actually really hasn't happened. And you can argue that Brexit was populist, but there has not been a populist prime minister of the UK.
No, and even Johnson wasn't. I mean, the thing about Johnson is his whole thing was basically, I'm going to deliver Brexit because nobody else is, and I'm going to save the party to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to purge, everybody in the party that doesn't go along with it. And it worked. because it paralyzed the British political system for years. But he wasn't really a populist. Farage might be the first one.
And he might be the, he might be the, the first far right prime minister of the UK. I mean, I for one don't see how Macron. I mean, unless Mélenchon does better than he seems to have been doing. I know I have some true believers in France Unbowed, but I just like
no,
they don't
I don't
pull
see
well
it.
right now.
No, they pull terribly. They pull like 50 points behind Bardella.
Right,
50. I'm not joking. Like it's bad. I mean,
they actually made their last round to power, where they seem to not be able to consolidate. They made at one point, I think Hollande was pulling as high as Mélenchon, and I was like, "Oh my god!" Like you're missing the old socialist. But I know a lot. The one thing I'll tell you is, even in France, I know a lot of true believers in France Unbowed, who come and talk to me and make these like wild predictions about how they're going to limit the presidency and rewrite the republic. And I'm just like, but while you're an order of magnitude larger than the DSA, I mean, they're like almost 100% larger in a smaller country, but you're still not popular, properly speaking. Like, it does seem like, even though Le Pen can't sit in power, that the National Front's going to eventually come to power if Macron cracks. And the only way Macron's not cracking is the government becoming less and less democratic. Like, I don't see a way around that right now.
Yeah, it's hard for me to foresee too. I guess the only thing is that, like, I mean, political entrepreneurs always emerge out of the blue. That's so who knows? I mean, that's even the case with with Reform in the UK with Farage. I mean, like, he could, something could crack there. Who knows? Because none of these parties are really solid. They're just taking advantage of the situation.
Absolutely, no, they don't have. I don't have a solid base. I mean,
right. I mean, that's the thing about representative democracy that I was talking about before. Like, these parties, they would lose because of events coming up, but they would always bounce back in that period, usually, unless there was a takeover like Hitler, but like in the post-war period, though, like, I mean, parties would get shit canned, then they'd come back because they still had some base in society. There's still a solidity to the political system there. That's gone because the parties, they're not representative except for themselves, and that's how you have political democracy now. Now we have politics that is increasingly self-referential.
Right.
Like these parties, they're for themselves, and even like these entrepreneurial vehicles, they tend to be highly centralized.
I mean, I guess this leads me to a couple of questions. Like, there's a lot of people. There are even some DSA people who are pretty realistic about the best Mamdani is going to be able to be is a slightly more progressive de Blasio, and Blasio was pretty progressive. I mean, on the spectrum of American politics, even compared to someone like Brandon Johnson in Chicago, who's unpopular. But progressives have a terrible historical track record of running cities because they run straight into the bond market, like over and over and over again. And when people will talk about sewer socialist, I'm like, but that's before the modern bond market really was how cities really funded themselves. In fact, when they more funded themselves through taxation, which they don't want to do now. And
that's not going to get better either. I mean, how many cities have pension bonds right now? I'm sure New York City does.
Right, exactly.
Like every government needs to deficit finance itself now. That's a problem. I think even for national politics. I mean, this is way off topic, but I wondered the COVID response has really constrained governments in terms of responding to recessions now.
Oh,
think about it.
Yeah, I mean, what are they going to do?
If there's a recession, I don't know. I mean, they can cut rates, bring inflation back.
Yeah, but
4 or
that
5%,
won't really work if there's high tariffs.
Yeah, that's
like, and if you get rid of the tariffs, I mean, plus there's all kinds of other problems. Like, we're very low job growth, but that actually means that things are worse than people realize, because baby boomers and even older Gen Xers are exiting the job market now. So, and those are big, Gen X is not a big generation, but baby boomers are. And we are declining in population. So, if job numbers are bad, it means there probably would have been way worse in 20 years ago. And they're in the United States, we seem to be basing everything off the gambit that will basically create electronic God, with very little evidence that we're doing so.
Right. I mean, AI was basically a gambit to avoid a recession.
Right. And now it's a super bubble.
Yeah, and it's all because nobody wants to. Everyone's afraid of the bottom dropping out, really. And the problem too, though, is that what are you going to do if there is a recession? You can't really. How much more stimulus can you do before your debt isn't serviceable at this point?
That's what people don't realize, and people are like, "Oh, you don't." Modern monetary theorists, they're right. The state can't run out of money, but you know what it can do? Not be able to purchase things in other countries because people don't want your currency anymore. And if you can't pay your debts, they don't want your currency. I mean, really, it really is kind of that simple.
Right. I mean, I guess both states are.
We are now, but well, when people are like, "Oh, we need to raise taxes on the rich," and I was like, "For what? To pay money back to the rich?" And like, what do you mean? I'm like, the largest portion of the budget now is servicing the federal debt. I know I sound like a conservative, but it's true. If you are taxing the rich and most of it is going towards servicing the federal debt, it's going back to the rich, because those are the primary people who own bonds. Like, I don't know how else to. You don't buy bonds. I don't buy. Like, when's the last time you and I have bought bonds? I probably have some in my 401k holdings, which isn't, my 401ks aren't amazing, but like.
Yeah, I might have one of my pension. I don't know, maybe.
Yeah, but like, my grandparents gave me bonds for gifts, like, short-term investment bonds and stuff, some of which they had kept since the 60s, and people don't do that anymore. Like, that is not something that the average working class person would even conceive of doing, much less do. And I say that my grandparents, because my grandfather was a brick maker. Like, we live in a completely different economy than that. Yes, it's true that the stock market, the stock market really does have us all on hostage, because so much of our bonds and municipal funds and all that are tied up in it that we really would be hurt by it. But none of us are actually investors. I mean, not none of us, but even most investors who own private stocks do not make enough of their living to be considered investors. They aren't making that as their primary form of self-sustainingness. So it's a weird, it's almost like a hostage situation. And what I see coming out of both the Democrats and the Republicans is ways to further tie people into the stock market with stock supported savings accounts and shit. I mean,
they do some out of ideas. Yeah. It's interesting too, because I remember looking at there was a I think the GOP pollster put it up, but it was about the economy. It was about how voters want the economy to be run, and it's very self-contradictory.
Mm-hmm.
They want inflation. They want prices to basically drop to what they used to be.
Right.
And there's some.
But they want high wages.
Yeah, they want high wages, and
they want local domestic production.
Right.
Which you can't have all three.
Yeah, no. And I think the thing is too is that politicians have overpromised. Oh, and they shot their bolt a little too hard. because they've done a lot of crazy policy in the last 10 years that, or last 25 even.
Can you give me some examples? Because people might be confused by what you mean here. But
well, I mean, getting back to the debt, even. I mean, like a lot of this comes out of what are the major things that in terms of debt, really? I get like why we went into debt for counter-cyclical policy after 2008, but the Bush tax cuts, for instance, and funding the wars on a credit card, that's a good example.
Yeah. Art today, where like almost everything Trump is doing is off the off chance that tariffs will bring in enough revenue. But of course, if tariffs bring in revenue, it means he's not returning domestic production, which he isn't returning domestic production. It's actually like the bottom's actually fallen out of domestic production under him. It's gotten worse because he's busted up all the supply chains. And I do think like Trump knows how to stump speech. I mean, we're recording this right after he did one yesterday.
It seemed very preaching to the choir, I think. I don't know if anybody's convinced by it, but
it seemed preaching to the choir, and it seems like he wants to ensure that MAGA is still his movement once he's gone. And I'm like, that's already out the door, buddy.
Like, he didn't. Yeah, I mean, he didn't whip them into shape basically this year. That was his. Now could it be? I don't know, but the problem is that like because he didn't discipline the right, he's become less authoritative. His popularity has been slipping gradually, and I think it's made the right think, oh, we can kind of get away with what we want now, but we also don't have any sense of direction. Like that's sort of the line that the right is in now. We can get away with criticizing Trump even, but what are we going to do now? Because they kind of looked at Trump as sort of their lodestar, really, because Trump is the first guy since Bush that could get elected. Right.
And actually, like Bush, won the popular vote the second time.
Yeah.
So it is hard for people to, I think, completely and totally deal with, in the sense that Trump may go down like Bush, where like people like think Bush was hated, but Bush was pretty popular in 2024, and by 2006, the man, like, I mean, his exit numbers were low by any standard.
Well, the thing about Bush, he shut up after he left office.
That's also true.
People like presidents that shut up after they leave office. Bush did that. He went away, and imagine if he didn't. I think his popularity would, it wouldn't be so good.
No, I actually think his numbers were bad when he actually left. He's been kind of fixed in memory. Whereas, and similar, I think it's similar with Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton didn't say that much. And as he's talked more, the longer he's been out of office, he's, not loved.
I think Hillary's kind of baggage in that sense too, I think, because of her package deal.
But I mean, I worry about for the sake of the Democrats, I'm not a Democratic Party booster, but I am sort of like, I also don't want like a political movement emerging out of Trump being in charge of anything when Trump is gone. I don't know what I want, actually. So I'm like everybody else in that regard. But I still don't see myself voting for a Democrat next term. But can you imagine if they run Kamala Harris again? Someone who's never been legitimately popular pretty much ever.
I don't think it's going to be Harris. It might be Newsom, but I don't know. Do they have anybody? That's kind of the issue. I guess this gets back to Mamdani too. Do I see AOC taking up Mamdani's mantle? I don't know. I don't think she has a skill. I don't think she has what it takes. She has a weak persona, and she already seems compromised.
But say she's not going to be. She was able to seem like Bernie's handpicked successor for about 30 minutes, but it didn't stick.
I think the problem is she treats Bernie like her seeing eye dog, kind of. It doesn't scream presidential to me. Right. like you don't got to treat the old man as your therapy dog. If you want to be president, you have to do these stunts on your own 2 feet, and I don't think she can. And
she's sort of lost the socialist left for reasons that are predictable. What they wanted was never going to happen.
Yeah. I mean, they're golems for political power. So I mean, like if she did get up, they would jump on the boat regardless. But that being said, yeah, no, I know what you're saying. Yeah, they would be fully committed.
But well, this is the thing. They were like, when we talk about the moderate socialist left, the Jacobin magazine left, they jumped on Biden's bandwagon too, which was stunning and looked so craven to outsiders. That's, to me, that's when like all the anti-political visage was gone. And people forget this, but like Bernie endorsed Biden early. And so did AOC. Like the left was more, the quasi-socialist left was more on the Biden train than Biden really was.
I remember after that debate last year. Remember the debate?
Yeah.
After Biden crapped himself or whatever in front of Trump, you had Bernie and AOC trying to like wring like stuff out of Biden. They're all defending him and like trying to get stuff out of him, and they kind of struck me like what a weak position they actually were in. Like I think the thing is they well, I don't know, what do you make of that actually? Like that was a weird moment to me because it kind of struck me as they kind of see this as their one shot at like getting any kind of power or relevance anymore at this point.
Right. Well, I mean, that seems to be true, except that you see Bernie like go on Tim Dillon and talk about border policy in a way that like, no, he's not exactly agreeing with Trump, but he said that Biden had too loose of a border policy. And I'm like, Biden's border policy was pretty much Trump 1's border policy. Like, so what's your complaint here? And so it seems like they're trying to do a kind of, nationalist pincer move, but I don't think it's going to work. I mean, one thing that really will alienate a lot of their base. And the other thing, like, it seems
insincere.
Right. I mean,
and that's death for a conviction politician. That's kind of the issue. I mean, even I actually have seen like some Democrats like make pivots like that in 2025, but again, it's the same issue really.
I mean, does anyone believe? Newsom seems sincere in opposition to Trump or mocking Trump, but if like anyone looks at his actual policies, they're going to have a hard time coming up with anything but establishment politics for him. And I'm just going to remind people, these same people used to be Cuomo stands. I'm not talking about the people who were Cuomo stands in this last mayoral election. I mean the people right after COVID who thought that he should run for president. Like,
yeah, I mean, I would trust the political instincts of people like that as far as I can throw them. But as far as Newsom goes, I mean, I think he's the type of candidate that he can appeal to Democrats.
Right.
That's it. But like, who's a Democrat anymore? I mean, 50% of Americans identify as independent now, right?
Right. Which is bad for both sides because
yeah, it is.
Because Trump only polls well amongst Republicans. He does not poll well amongst independents anymore. But believe it or not, and even as unpopular he was during his first term, he polled fairly well most of the time amongst certain kinds of independents. I get, and to talk about independence, I'm technically an independent. So like, you don't know, like that's a big broad category that includes everyone from the 5 libertarians to still exist to your weird normie uncle to socialists who refuse to register as Democrats. The few of us who do. Like, what are you going to do?
Right. I mean, that is where 50% of the country is too now. I mean, and yeah, as you said, like it does cover a lot. It covers a lot of people that I think. It even covers a lot of people that I think they vote one party or another most of the time, but they don't want to be associated with it.
Correct.
And a lot of people say you're basically a Democrat or you're basically a Republican, but I think it's an important distinction, though, actually, because a lot of politics really is driven by negative partisanship rather than close attachment at this point.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true.
Yeah, and on both ends too. And I'm not saying that's a Democrat or Republican thing.
So I guess, if I'm in the DSA and I saw a 5,000 member increase, and I've seen a bump in compared to when Trump is in power, and I am in the DSA, so this is actually true. But what happens when the Dems come back in the power? And I know there's the industrial Democratic, but Democratic small D defense fund, all those former neoconservatives at the Bulwark and whatnot who do their thing. But and they'll talk about Trump being declaring yourself dictator for life. But even I've been like, the man's so old, what would that even mean? Like, you start your dictatorship for life at 80? Like, come on.
Yeah, no, I don't think Trump is Philip Pétain. No. I mean, what I think is going to happen is, like, he might threaten to run a third term just to, like, try to discipline his Republican successor, whoever the hell that is. It might be Vance, but he doesn't seem very hot on Vance, if you've noticed.
No, I don't know who is hot on Vance. So, other than maybe Peter Thiel. But
I do think he initially had more goodwill among Republican voters.
Mm-hmm.
But
because they forgot how he started.
yeah. And he does know how to be aggressive with media, which I think they like.
Right.
I think that's even like why I was confused why people thought that Tim Walz would like beat him in a debate. I was like, he's actually fairly savvy when it comes to handling media, so I didn't buy that for a minute, really. But yeah, I mean, it is kind of, it is hard to picture him as winning an election. Not impossible. I mean, consider what his competition is, but no.
Well, it's one of these times where generic Democrat does pretty well, but generic Democrats don't exist. They're an abstraction.
Right. I tend to think when polls say generic D or generic R, people picture ideal D, ideal R.
Right.
Actual candidates never outpoll them. You need somebody like, I don't know. Actually, one thing I always found interesting is that, the Obama comparisons to Mamdani. I'm not saying that there's nothing there, actually, because Obama had his own. I mean, Obama ran against the party.
Yeah, people forget this. Like, he ran pretty hard against the party, actually.
He did. And, but the thing is, too, though, he won 40% of Republicans in Illinois in 2004. And I think, I'd have to, like, look, but I'm pretty sure he might have had a 50% approval rating among national Republicans at some point. Or at least close. I'd have to look at that. Let me look at that again, actually. Let me search that. But let's see. Some approvals. Okay, more like 25 to 35% possibly, but that's very high actually in terms of.
That's very high in a highly polarized electorate, which we've been in since what, the fucking 90s. I mean,
right. I mean, Obama started in office with what, a 70% approval rating. It's difficult to imagine a candidate like that now. I can't imagine one, but it would be something that's completely out of the box that you're seeing now.
Yeah.
It had to be something that ran completely against the entire political setup and was very non-ideological and personally likable.
I mean, this brings us to like a point you've been making for about maybe 8 years, that both right and left populists engage in anti-politics, but right-wingers are usually better positioned to actually
take advantage of it.
Take advantage of it because they have a clearer negative relationship to the state, whereas left wingers, like, I mean, the amount of like far leftists who defend the administrative state is like, on one hand, I very much know why people want to defend the administrative state because it is deep in everyone's lives, and if it goes away, all sorts of social supports and systems fall away now. That's absolutely true. On the other hand, if you were going to imbue a socialist project, you would have to tackle that, and if you didn't, you would likely end up like the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, like,
or a sort of soft Soviet system,
right? Like, the apparatchiks will be running everything, and they don't necessarily share your politics. Which, by the way, trying to control the apparatchiks in the Soviet system and in the Chinese system were violent. They because they had no other control of them. The only way that they had to control the apparatchiks was fear, and when that fear went away, I'm not saying I actually don't think it's good to try to control even apparatchiks through pure fear. It's a bad idea, but that's what the purges were about to some degree. And that was definitely what the Cultural Revolution was about.
Yeah, I think that's forgotten about too, actually, with the purges. I think it's very personalized with Stalin, and it really, in all reality, it sounds perverse, but it was like it was an anti-bureaucracy move,
right?
One that killed, how many people? 1 million, 2 million?
Yeah, a bunch.
Yeah, a lot.
And got rid of like most of the old Bolsheviks, like almost all of them, like. And many people who were innocent. There's no way around that. So, even if you believed in their goal, they got a lot of people who weren't guilty. But my point is, like, if you don't have other ways to tackle the apparatchiks, that happens. It's not like that's the only place that's ever happened before. You think about apparatchiks getting out of line in tributary empires, like in the caliphates. When that gets out of hand, there's usually massacres. And you think about the gutting of the state and the re-strengthening of it under Henry VIII. I'm not saying this is trans-historical by any sense, but it's not unique. And so you do have to deal with that. And one of the ironies that you do have to deal with is like an executive or a king or whoever can be seen as both a very anti-democratic and a very pro-democratic figure at the same time. Because while it is actually just logically true that the legislature is a better manifestation of democracy in a representative sense, it's also easier for the legislature to have all kinds of oligarchic and elite capture in it. Whereas you have a strong central power that it can seem like it's manifesting the will of the people against a bureaucratic center. I mean, that's not a modern phenomenon. We can look at the early modern and medieval periods for very clear examples of this. And I think one of the things that we have to think about is like, well, like, how do you run politics this way? Like, if I want to do class politics in America, which would necessarily be a mass politics, I would have to deal with the fragmentation of the working class in general and its own fragmentation, which is pretty significant. And two, I'm going to have to deal with the fact that most of the people who want to do that class politics aren't of that class. That's always been true. That's not a new thing, by the way. That's kind of always been true. The people most interested in working class politics have historically not been the people from the working class itself. For the most part, there are exceptions, the Debsian period being one of them, but like in general, it's just the anarchists say, oh, the socialists are all of a different class, and the people who complain about the PMC are PMC, and I'm like, yeah, that's true, but it's kind of always been true. And I mean, that's also going to be true for a lot of socialists today. Like,
Well, I think too, like, it becomes a question of like why is there that level of detachment really?
Mm-hmm.
Why was the working class amenable to this in the 19th to early 20th century, but is closed off to it now? What has changed?
Actually, that's a good question. What do you think is the reason?
Well, I guess the thing is, what happened in that period?
Well, the fall of the Soviet. I mean, between what uh
Let's say between like 1900 to 1990.
the okay fall of the Soviet Union, the establishment of the Soviet Union, um, the national liberation movements, but most of them ended up still implicated in global capitalism. Reform movements became more and more neoliberalized. The union movement became more professionalized and stayed, and eventually more or less reduced itself. There is a workers' movement, but it now has no clear. I mean, I would even say today, people will go out, well, there is a workers' movement. And I'm like, well, if there's a workers' movement, it's constipated because it actually cannot be manifested in the unions right now and be mass because the unions do not have mass membership. Like,
They don't have
so
yeah, yeah. I think too, like, actually, well, maybe I should narrow it down too, because I actually think I wonder if I think there's something. It's something I'm trying to like fully unpack right now
mhm.
for Rabble Report. But what even happens between 1900 and 1950? We see the smashing of the most radical workers' movements, right?
Mm-hmm.
What do
Yeah.
they get smashed on? They get smashed on. They get smashed in the Russian Civil War. They get smashed on fascism, and the remnants of them kind of get vacuumed up into fighting World War II. And I think what happens is you see this exhaustion. I think where the working class kind of is like, okay, fine, we'll sign into maybe the state will give us something, and you see this sort of like retreat from high levels of class conflict because it isn't worth it. I don't think, or it isn't. It isn't seen as worth it anymore
Mm-hmm.
because. And I think it's because of like the limitations and embodiment and representation that they were dealing with at that point, really. Um, and I do think it could have gone a different way in some ways if the revolution in Germany succeeded or in Italy, but that isn't what
Mm-hmm.
happened. What did happen is that I think what did happen is that mass politics was actually quite a disaster for the working class, and they never really quite recovered their organizational capacity or even like I think their or even I think that a sense of like of I think both mass politics and also like and civil I think even like the civil association of trade unions as their vehicle, as their own autonomous vehicle for their own power, and to
Mm-hmm.
and that you can pursue that to an end where they control things. It got
Right.
messy.
It got real messy because you had professional union payment. You had unions in the 70s, you had people, union leaders being paid in stock. You had, um, you had the fact that sectional interest of unions could sometimes actually hurt other sections of the working class. Um, and that was never, supposedly that was supposed to be dealt with in the socialist movement, but it never really was.
Right.
Um,
It's interesting too. I was thinking about this with the German Revolution. I mean, the German Revolution actually came out of the rank and file and middle rankings of the German trade unions. It didn't come out of the top. Definitely didn't come out of the politicians either.
yeah, that's true.
But the revolutionary shop stewards, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that says something actually about like. I think there was already. I mean, even though it was a mass party, there was already I think, a sense, or there was already a sort of movement towards cartelization with the state by 1940, by World War One, really, a sense that like, there was already that early inkling of the socialist parties becoming state parties.
Mm-hmm. I mean, even today, if you talk to the average socialist, the idea that socialists oppose, and even in the long term, working class dependence on the state, would you be laughed at by a lot of people and make a lot of, I mean, particularly even Maoists who historically were the most hostile to the state, of the various socialist groups in some ways, that today you wouldn't get that anymore. So it seems like a lot of this is kind of unserious. I was going to ask you about the most controversial thing that you and I kind of agree on, which is that for all that socialism is based on pro-social impulses, the irony right now is a lot of the people attracted to it show the same kind of antisocial tendencies that you see on the far right. And I wondered why you think that is.
Well, I mean,
do you agree with me that that's true, that you see a lot of antisocial tendencies among socialists?
Sure. Right. I don't think it's unique to them, though. I think
no, not at all.
I think there's actually been a radicalization of the political. I use the political class as a term broadly here. I think there's been a radicalization of the political class, and I think the highly politically engaged against the public and against society at large, especially in the last 10 years. And I think it's. I think
that might be slightly better, but the antisocial tendencies have set in, like. But maybe you disagree with me. I do feel like I've seen a lot less of like, the average person is a flipping moron that you saw amongst even a lot of socialists in like 2019. But maybe I'm wrong about that.
I think it's always going to come rearing back. Honestly, I think there's something. I think it's kind of baked into politics, really, because I think the issue is. Treating social power is something abstracted from your own, really. But so I guess we could get into it at some point. I don't know about tonight, but I do think that there's sort of been a sort of maybe an unconscious like tactical distance from that type of thing. Sure, and I think even like Mamdani's victory is kind of. I do think it kind of rode on that, really. It's like I said, he had to sound like he wasn't crazy, which he succeeded at.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like he wants to punish all of society, which a lot of both socialist and non-socialist leftists often do sound like they just want to punish most of society.
Right, and I mean the right absolutely does, but
yeah.
So I think a lot
of. I hate to tell people, but the right and the left of America is produced by the same fucking society, so we shouldn't be surprised when they have some similar trends. But anyway,
I think too. Like, what was I going to say on this? I do think there's. Yeah, there is a. I think too, though, that's related to this as well. I think because there has been a move towards what I call political democracy. There's a tendency. I think one of my friends said this actually. There's a tendency within politics to see like your narrow faction of politics as democracy itself, and everything else is sort of an antisocial threat that must be contained, including the public. Right. Sometimes, I guess I think the left has cooled down on the rhetoric in the last few years on this a bit, but I don't know if the tendency would disappear if they actually got in power.
Well, they've cooled down on the rhetoric, but then if you look at the tendencies that are popular on the left, that they tend to be more lockstep, more sectarian, more LARPy. Frankly,
there's certainly
replay the Soviet Union over and over again, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I do think there's like a fetishization of like pistolero stuff too.
Right. Yeah.
But I think it's still there. I just think it's different now.
Right. But I don't think you see as many people just like seemingly declaring war on all of society all the time. Even among some of the most if we remember what rhetoric was like during Trump 1 and even the end of Obama, it was the average person is somehow worse than fascist, even though there's no polls supporting that they're as reactionary as they're being portrayed. And I think you actually see this more amongst liberals still now, where they're like, oh, the entire world's become right wing. Gen Z has become right wing, and I was like, Gen Z was never left wing as people were claiming in 2023. But I also think there's been a massive overcorrection because basically Gen Z is a bunch of independents and like, oh, they're all buying into the manosphere and they're all politically right wing. And I'm like, no, they're kind of apolitical. Frankly,
I wonder why.
Yeah.
Why do you hate politics?
What obvious bunch of things happened that would like lead them to such a conclusion? Like,
yeah, what happened in the last 10 years? Do you have? I don't know. I know what you're talking about. But yeah, there is that like lack of self-reflection that's I think intriguing. But there was something I wanted to say on this. I think the thing too though is that I think the ultimate issue is, and I think this is why like that anti-social tendency will always come rearing back sooner or later, is they don't see society as the wellspring of its own progress. And but like, what is socialism then?
Yeah. I mean, particularly if you read stuff like Engels talking to Kotsky on like why socialism is not just nationalization, right? Like they're very clear on that. Like if you don't believe that the society is coming with you, then I don't know what you think socialism is, other than social goods being provided for you by the state. And okay, you don't need mass democracy for that, really. So
no, I mean the Arab country, the Gulf Arab countries do very good at that.
Yeah, at least for certain people.
Yeah, for citizens, I should say. For citizens, yeah,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but what was I going to say on this? But yeah, I mean, it has to be an aspect of it is self-governance, really. And if you don't see society as like the wellspring of its own progress, I mean, it's not just anti-democratic. I mean, like there isn't really there is a viable path to socialism or human emancipation either, really.
Yeah,
I'm actually not that cynical. I'm like, people will say I'm cynical. I actually am not, but I do think that I actually think that this type of thinking invites that type of cynicism. I think it's because there's a sort of misplaced conception of where what Marx called the real movement actually lays exactly. And I think the left tends to see itself as the social, and it isn't.
Yeah, the already existing social, even though it's a very small portion of general society.
Right, and I think the thing is it's. I do think that the left tends to think that the real movement disappeared. In the 70s or 80s because of neoliberalism, whatever.
Yeah, whatever story you want to tell yourself for why. Yeah,
but I tend to think that Marx was probably correct on this, actually, in that like it's an intrinsic part of capitalism and capitalist development. There's still a degree of sort of secular social liberalization. And what was I going to say on this? Actually, there's something else. And I think anti-politics actually is part of it. Is actually part of this real movement, and I think it always was, really, because there is that intrinsic separation between the political state and civil society that Marx wrote about very explicitly in his work. And that actually, I think, is intensified over the last several decades because there has been a mutual retreat of both the political sphere and of civil society from each other.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how that doesn't like factor into the real movement, especially now, actually, because there had obviously like sharp class conflict has declined. So this main expression seems to be it seems to be like the first contradiction that Marx fell on, actually, because in his first writings about communism, he's talking about politics, and he's talking about Hegel, and he's talking about how the political state isn't actually like it isn't the realization of social will. It's actually very wanting in that. And maybe that's sort of where that might be where civil society has kind of circled back to. There's something like even if you're not seeing that type of class conflict, there is across society, really, and across class too. Actually, this this detachment from the political sphere and this detachment from the political state. And I guess this realization that we're all sort of we're all separate from our social potentiality and our social power.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, Joseph, I'm gonna thank you for coming on. I think I'm gonna have you back soon. And I think what we're gonna do next time is actually maybe you can send me some of those piping strike articles and we can talk about them, because I think maybe it'll make what we're talking about make a little bit more sense. And you and I have come to similar conclusions, I've said before in the last time you show, but from different outlooks. So maybe us talking about where those outlooks overlap and where they don't with specific text will be helpful for people. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I mean, I felt like I got jargony by the end of it anyway. I'm throwing a lot of stuff that I've been thinking about for years, but
Right.
but yeah, no, I agree. I'll send you articles I was looking at.
Yeah, send me articles, and we'll set up a episode in the next couple months, and or probably in the next month. And listeners will hear it in the next from when I release this in the next month or two. Thank you so much for coming on. They can find you at the Rabble Report. How much you guys post? I feel like fairly a lot.
Oh God, actually, no, it's been a couple. I had an eye surgery last
okay.
week,
So
and we've been both really busy at work. We have an episode that we're going to be working on soon. It's going to be a good one, I hope. But I just want to make sure it's worth the wait. But
okay.
that's also why I wanted to do this, and I jumped the gun on it quickly too, because I realized actually we haven't pumped out content. We've been trying, but we've both been busy.
Yeah, I understand. Well, people should look up the Rabble Report and follow you guys on. You can find it on Spotify and on YouTube. Thank you so much for coming on, and have a great day.